Yiana had always been the quiet one. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She answered gently, her voice soft and distant, like it came from the far edge of a dream. People mistook her silence for weakness, her wide eyes for ignorance. But what she lacked in loudness she made up for in vividness. Inside her head bloomed entire cities. She could spend a whole afternoon staring at the clouds, imagining palaces growing on their backs, or warriors riding the winds. Her cousins called her names for it: Woolbrain, Cloud Eater, Mute Mouse. Sometimes just stupid. They hated how different she was. Where they learned to cook, fetch firewood, and braid hair, Yiana drew strange shapes in the dust, whispered to her pillow at night, and once tried to teach a lizard how to spell her name. "That one dreams too much," her aunt would say, shaking her head as she stirred the pot. "Dreams don't fill bellies." Yiana's only real possession was the pillow her mother had sewn for her before she died. It wasn't much, old fabric stitched in faded thread, thin stuffing barely holding shape, but it had her mother's scent. She slept with her nose pressed into it every night, whispering stories into its center as though it were alive, as though it could keep the words for her safe. Her cousins, for girls older and meaner, resented that pillow more than anything. "Why do you love this rag?" one sneered. "Is it your baby?" "No," said another, snatching it once. "It's her only friend." They laughed and tossed it around like a ball while Yiana stood helpless, arms out, tears in her eyes but refusing to fall. She knew crying only made things worse. But one evening they went too far. It was the eve of the Yam festival, and the compound buzzed with excitement. The girls were meant to be preparing for the celebration, but their aunt had given them a few hours of rest. While Yiana helped pluck feathers from a chicken, they stole into her corner of the room, slit the side of the pillow open with a small blade, and stuffed it with wet, warm cow dung. Not just a handful, they filled it, pressed it in with sticks, then sewed it back shut roughly, hiding their stitches under the fabric's fold. They sprayed the outside with perfume and tucked it back where they found it. That night, Yiana came in from sweeping the yard. She looked tired. Her hands were scraped, her fingernails rimmed with red earth. But she smiled a little to herself when she saw her pillow waiting. She knelt beside it, touched it gently and whispered, "Today I saw a bird with gold on its head. It landed near me. Maybe it was Mama checking." She pressed her face against the fabric and closed her eyes. The scream that tore from her throat moments later split the night like lightning. It was primal, high and raw, as if something had died inside her. She leapt up, clutching her face, retching. The stench had already soaked into her skin, her hair. Cow dung, thick and fresh, smeared across her cheek, her lips, her nose. She vomited in the corner. Outside, lights flickered on. Doors creaked open. Voices rang out. The cousins pretended to wake groggily, blinking and yawning as they joined the crowd outside her room. "What's going on?" one asked. "Is it a snake? Maybe a spirit?" another said. But when the adults stepped inside and found Yiana curled in the corner, rocking and sobbing with the pillow at her feet, the laughter began. Not just from the cousins, but the neighbors too. "She slept in shit," one boy shouted. "Maybe she dreamt of the cow." "Did you think it was perfume, dream girl?" Her aunt didn't stop them. She just sighed and said, "Serves you right. Too much dreaming. Now sleep on the floor like the rest of us." The pillow was taken and thrown into the fire pit, but it refused to burn. The dung inside hissed and steamed, but the fabric stayed intact, darkened but not destroyed. After several attempts, her aunt finally flung it into the compost heap, muttering, "Nonsense child and her nonsense cloth." Yiana didn't speak the next day. Not during the yam feast, not when her aunt told her to scrub the latrine, not when her cousins teased her mercilessly. But she stared. Her eyes were no longer distant or soft. They were sharp, as if suddenly made of mirrors. When her eldest cousin tried to shove her aside, she stepped away with such calm grace that the girl stumbled over her own feet. The laughter that followed didn't feel so cruel this time, it felt uncertain. And the smell never left. No matter how many times she bathed, scrubbed her skin with lemon peel and ash, shaved her head, burned her clothes, the scent clung. Not the sharp stink of dung anymore. Something stranger. Something like wet rot mixed with incense. It moved with her. People began to notice. "She always smells like the earth," a little boy said once, not unkindly. "She smells like something buried," whispered her cousin, afraid. The aunt tried oils, powders, smoke baths. Nothing worked. It wasn't a constant smell. It pulsed, stronger when people lied or mocked her. When her aunt struck her for dropping a spoon, the smell filled the whole room. One cousin began coughing. Another threw up. Strange things followed. A string of fever dreams. Her cousins complained of headaches and visions of the pillow standing upright in the dark, humming. One swore she heard Yiana whisper her name through the keyhole. Not in her voice, she said, shaking. Something deeper. Yiana still said nothing. She took to sleeping on the bare floor. But some mornings, neighbors found muddy footprints at the edge of their doors. The children began avoiding her. Her cousins started locking their room at night. Once, a visitor stayed late and laughed at her silence, called her the cowgirl prophet. He left but returned hours later, disheveled, sobbing, his tongue swollen and blackened. Still no one connected the dots. No one, except the old widow in the next compound, who came one evening and left a bowl of water and herbs at Yiana's door. You held pain too tightly, she said gently. And now it walks with you. Yiana looked at the bowl. For the first time in weeks she spoke. They put death in my dreams, she said quietly. But I dreamed anyway. The widow bowed and walked away. That night her cousins found their own pillows soaked. Not with water. Not with dung. With thick black liquid that smelled like sorrow and rot. They screamed. The aunt ordered the whole house burned, beds, mats, even some clothes. But the smell didn't fade. From then on, no one touched Yiana's space again. She was given her own mat, her own room. Not from kindness, from fear. The pillow never returned. But some nights, neighbors said they could hear something breathing near her bed. Not her, something else. And always the scent lingered. The smell that began as shame had turned into a warning. She still didn't smile. But sometimes when her cousins passed by, heads lowered, their own dreams now troubled and thin, she would hum softly under her breath. A melody made of dirt and sleep and dignity that refused to rot. And the earth always seemed to listen. After the night the stink never left her, Yiana became a different girl. Not louder, not angrier, just quieter in a way that felt deeper. Her silences weren't soft anymore. They were thick. Like fog. Her cousins still avoided her, and her aunt, who once barked orders at her with confidence, had begun using intermediaries. Tell the girl to sweep, she'd murmur to the neighbor's child, not daring to meet Yiana's eye. Even the family dog, once fond of chasing her, now whimpered whenever she passed. And through it all, Yiana said almost nothing. But that didn't mean she was resting. She slept harder than before, longer than anyone thought possible. At first they thought she was pretending. Lazy girl, her aunt spat, shaking her head as if Yiana stayed curled on her mat even past sunrise. But when she didn't respond to her name, didn't flinch when a spoon clanged beside her, didn't stir when cold water was poured on her legs, they realized something else was wrong. Or at least different. Her sleep was deep, so deep she barely moved. Yet when she finally woke, sometimes at midday, sometimes not until dusk, her eyes opened wide and wild as though she had seen things too big to name. She'd sit up slowly, press her hand against her pillow and whisper, "Still warm." That pillow, the one once stuffed with cow dung by her cousins, had not been burned after all. Someone had pulled it from the compost heap. No one claimed responsibility. But one morning it reappeared at the foot of her mat, clean, whole, and humming faintly. Yes, humming. No one else could hear it, but Yiana did. She knew its rhythm now. It was the sound of breathing. Not hers. And the longer she slept on it, the heavier it grew. She began dozing mid-task. Drawing water, her eyes would flutter and she'd spill the bowl. Carrying firewood, she'd stop and stand still, lost somewhere behind her gaze. Even while eating, she'd drop her food and blink slowly, face slack as if she were slipping between one world and another. Sleepwalking, the aunt muttered. But the village healer, a stooped man with trembling hands and cloudy eyes, came to see her once. He didn't even touch her. Just looked at the pillow beside her, sniffed the air and turned pale. Something else sleeps in her bed, he whispered, backing away. Something that remembers. Yiana didn't deny it. She dreamed more than ever now. Not the harmless dreams of trees and animals and flying above rooftops. These were thick, sticky dreams. Dark places. Rooms with no doors. Shadows with sharp white teeth that grinned without faces. Flies that gathered around her pillow and whispered names into her ears. Names she didn't recognize but felt like they belonged to her. Names full of earth and ash and heat. Sometimes she saw the dung again, but now it opened like a flower, revealing small mouths inside, whispering secrets. "Sleep, child," they said. "Sleep so we can feed." She started waking with marks on her arms. Not scratches, not bruises. Just imprints, as if fingers had gently pressed her skin during the night. Long, narrow fingers, far too many to be human. She never told anyone. Instead, she began sleeping outside, under the eaves of the hut, near the compost heap where the pillow had been reborn. She curled into it like a second body, and the pillow, despite being cloth and thread, always felt warm against her cheek. Warm and pulsing. As if it had a heartbeat of its own. Some nights, her cousins swore they saw her floating slightly above the mat, hair lifted as though underwater. Other nights, they heard a second voice coming from her corner, not echoing her own but answering. Oh, breathless. Hungry. Are you dreaming again? Her aunt once asked, not unkindly, as she watched the girl stumble toward the water pot at noon, her eyes red-rimmed and glazed. No, Yiana whispered. I'm being dreamed. She could no longer tell where her body ended and the sleep began. Even when awake, she felt herself slipping sideways, pulled toward corners of the room where shadows didn't behave. She began to hear the ticking of insects more clearly. They buzzed in her dreams in languages she almost understood. One night, she spoke aloud in her sleep. A language no one knew. Her mouth moved rapidly, her eyes rolled back. Her aunt tried to wake her, and was flung back by something unseen. Not violently, just firmly. As though a giant palm had said not yet. The whispers became bolder. Yiana began to say strange things to the neighbors' children. Your grandfather left something in the well. Don't eat the yam with the crack. It remembers too much. Your goat is sick, not in its belly but in its shadow. And she was always right. The villagers began keeping their distance. The aunt called a priestess to intervene. But the priestess never reached the compound. She fell asleep on the road and didn't wake until morning, muttering about a pillow with a human tongue. One day Yiana didn't wake at all. They found her lying flat, mouth slightly open, breathing shallow. Her hands were curled tightly around the pillow, which now looked even fuller, swollen, as though something were growing inside it. The fabric had changed. No longer the faded cotton her mother stitched, but something coarser, grayer, fibrous and slick at once. When the aunt touched it, her hand recoiled as though stung. The house grew colder. Despite the sun outside, breath misted indoors. The floorboards warped. The clay pot by the door cracked. By the third day, Yiana still hadn't moved. They thought she was dead. The cousins cried, full of guilt and terror, but her body stayed warm. Still breathing. Still dreaming. They tried to take the pillow away. That was the mistake. The moment it left her arms, she bolted upright, not with fear but fury. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim room. The air stank of wet rot. She looked around slowly, deliberately, and said a single sentence. She was never your house. Then collapsed again. From that moment on, no one touched the pillow. No one touched her. The cousins left the compound in shifts. One moved to a far village. Another joined the river convent. The aunt became ill and took to sleeping outside. Only Yiana remained inside the hut. And she kept sleeping. Hours. Days. But when she woke, she was always changed. She began humming songs she never learned, funeral songs from a generation ago. She named animals no longer found in the forest. Her hands moved in odd gestures while she dreamt, as if weaving or sewing things no one could see. One night the pillow opened. Not split. Opened, like a mouth yawning wide. From inside came the smell of iron and clay. And the buzzing of flies. No one saw it. But the neighbor's dog went mad that night and died howling. After that she stopped using the pillow. She placed it on a stool by the fire, covered it with white cloth, and began bowing to it every morning. Not like worship, more like greeting a guest. A dangerous one. She still slept, yes. But now she chose when. She chose where. And when she closed her eyes, people swore the wind changed direction. Shadows leaned toward her. Trees bent. Yiana was no longer a girl. She was a boundary. Between breath and dream. Between cloth and skin. Between sleep and what fed on it. And the pillow? It waits. Still warm. Still humming. The cousins were the first to hear it. Not a sound in the way you'd hear a drum or a voice calling your name, but a feeling first. A tickle in the back of the throat. A strange lift of the hairs on the arms. A sudden coolness under the skin when no breeze moved. And then the sound came. A giggle. Short, sharp. Childlike. At first, they thought it was one of the younger neighbor kids playing tricks after dark. But when they stepped outside with torches, nothing stirred. No feet scurried. No children laughed. And the giggle came again, from behind them this time. Then above. Then under. One cousin, the tallest boy, pretended not to hear it. But that night he tossed on his mat until sweat soaked the sheet. When he finally slept, he woke up gagging. Dirt in his mouth. Dirt in his teeth. Dirt packed like paste behind his lips. He spat black and couldn't explain how it got there. The next morning he didn't meet anyone's eyes. "She's doing this," whispered another cousin, a girl with shaking hands. "She's the one laughing. That girl." But they knew better. Yiana didn't laugh anymore. She barely spoke. She floated between sleep and something else, something weightless. Her eyes were always half shut now, but her lips sometimes curled in a way that could not be called a smile. It was older than that. More like a knowing. More like a dare. And the laughter? It got louder. It threaded through the mud walls of the compound, starting at dusk. Low and sharp or high and clipped, but always there. It came through pillows. Through cooking pots. Through holes in thatched roofs. One cousin heard it bubbling up through the bathwater. Another heard it in his own belch. And strangest of all, the goats began to echo it. It started with one. A small white nanny goat that hadn't bleated in weeks suddenly raised its head, stared at the cousins as they passed, and let out a short, breathless ha-ha. It wasn't a bleat. It wasn't an animal sound. It was laughter. One cousin dropped her basket and ran. She tripped twice before reaching the gate. Another cousin tried to hush the goat, and got butted in the gut so hard she vomited. The goat turned and stared at Yiana's sleeping mat. Then it bleated again. Or did it laugh? It was becoming hard to tell the difference. Their nights turned brittle. Fragile with tension. They stopped sleeping deeply, startled awake by sounds only they heard. One night, all three remaining cousins burst from their separate rooms at once, pale and panting, each claiming the same dream. A black pillow hovering over their face. Laughter rising from it. Pressure on their chest. Warm breath in their ears. A giggle that didn't stop, even when they tried to scream. They slept together on the porch after that, too afraid to be alone. The aunt tried to chase Yiana from the compound. "She's cursed," she told the visiting priest. "She brought this laughter with her." But the priest didn't even make it past the gate. He took one look at the girl sleeping in the corner of the room, her head turned just so toward the humming pillow, and he stepped back. "She's not the source," he said softly. "She's the echo." That night even the walls laughed. The laughter came in threes. Giggle, pause, giggle. Then a silence too wide to be natural. Then a wheezing exhale, like the walls themselves were catching their breath. Like the compound had lungs. The laughter filled the clay pots with strange vibrations. The cousin who tried to cook couldn't light a fire. The sticks hissed and burst into smoke before any flame could take hold. The stew turned bitter. Rice clumped. Yams blackened inside before they finished boiling. At market, no one would meet the aunt's eyes. Children ran from her stall. Some threw small handfuls of dirt at her. Others just stared, wide-eyed and silent. The aunt's anger boiled over. She came home that day and slapped Yiana across the face, though the girl was still half asleep. "If you won't wake up," she hissed, "I'll wake you myself." The laughter exploded. Not from Yiana, but from every room. The floorboards vibrated. The bowls on the shelves jittered. The mirror cracked. Goat screamed. A neighbor rushed over, thinking someone had died. Inside, the aunt crouched by the doorway, arms wrapped over her ears. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She opened her mouth, and giggles spilled forth unbidden. Not words. Not cries. Just peals of laughter she could not control. She wept, but she laughed. Yiana, half asleep, turned her head slightly. Her lips curled. The cousins fled that night. They ran barefoot, not even bothering with their sandals. They didn't pack food or carry mats. They simply left, eyes wild and fixed forward. The neighbors saw them pass, said nothing, and locked their doors tighter. Only the aunt remained now. And Yiana. And the pillow. And the giggles. They weren't always malicious, these laughs. Some nights they sounded like a child being tickled. Other nights they sounded like someone watching a joke only they understood. But always they arrived before the hour of deepest sleep. Just before the shadows settled. Sometimes a passerby would hear it too. A laugh from an empty window. A chuckle from beneath the cooking shed. A snicker from inside the well. If you laugh back, the old healer warned once, it may never leave your throat. No one laughed back. One night, Yiana rose from her mat, still half asleep. Her eyes remained closed. Her feet were silent on the floor. She walked to the center of the courtyard, pillow tucked under her arm, and lay it on the stone where they once slaughtered goats during harvest season. Then she whispered a name. No one heard it. But the laughter stopped. Not for long, just a breath. Just long enough for the aunt to peek through the curtain and see Yiana standing in the moonlight, her face calm, her lips pale. The girl turned, and though her eyes were closed, she looked directly at her aunt. I told them a story, she said. They liked it. Then the girl lay back on the mat, cradled her pillow and fell into a dreamless sleep. The laughter returned at dawn, lighter now. Almost musical. As if the house were humming a lullaby made of mirth. As if it had fed on fear and was now content. But if Yiana? She slept deeply. And in her sleep she smiled. The goats bleated laughter. And the house, once cruel, once echoing with mockery, now laughed for her. Not at her. For her. Because even cruelty can be turned inside out. Even nightmares can become jester songs. Even silence, when held long enough, begins to laugh back. The sun hadn't yet climbed fully over the compound walls when her aunt, fed up with the stink, stormed into the room. The air inside had grown thick with a smell that clung, not just dung but rot beneath it, sweet and sickly. Her aunt covered her nose and pulled the pillow away from beneath Yianna's head with 2 fingers like it was a dead bird. Yianna stirred but didn't wake. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parted slightly, and then she turned her face to the earth floor and continued sleeping. The aunt cursed under her breath. "You'll not poison this house with your dreams," she snapped, and marched out toward the courtyard basin with the pillow. The compound well had long since run dry, but she poured rainwater from the clay jar into the basin, forcing the pillow beneath with a strong hand. The cloth bubbled as it sank like something exhaling. She scrubbed hard, lips tight, as if washing away more than a smell, as if she could scrub the madness from their walls, the whispers from their nights, the laughter from her ears. But then the water changed. First, a murky gray spread out like ink in slow motion. Then it deepened, not to brown, not to red, but to black. Tar-thick, lightless black. The kind of black that doesn't shimmer in sun, the kind that eats it. Her aunt gasped and yanked her hands back. But the pillow stayed submerged, churning now as if something underneath it was kicking. She screamed. The neighbors didn't come running this time. They had learned. The pillow rose slowly, bloated and twitching. It surfaced on its own, the fabric now warped and dark. The seam stretched. One thread snapped. Then another. The cloth, once tightly stitched, began to part like lips unzipping. And then, the flies. They came pouring out, not buzzing in frantic chaos but with order. Like smoke shaped into insects. They rose in a column first, straight up, then swarmed outward in every direction. Her aunt stumbled back and slipped, falling hard onto her hip. She screamed again, this time wordless, as the flies disappeared into the morning light. She crawled away on her elbows, but not before she saw it. Not before she saw the hair. It lay coiled in the basin like a sleeping snake, black, long, wet. Too long. Too familiar. She remembered the funeral. She remembered how they dressed the body in haste. How the women whispered over the corpse. How they debated whether the hair should be cut or left to rot. She remembered touching it herself just once to make sure the dead were truly cold. It was the same hair. Her sister's hair. The woman who birthed the quiet girl. Buried long ago. Now resting in the basin like she'd only stepped out for a breath. "No," the aunt whispered. "No. This is a trick." She reached toward it with trembling hands. The water moved. Not lapping. Not splashing. It shifted deliberately. The pillow tilted. And from inside its open seam, something else slid out, just for a moment. A white thread, red-stained at the end, wound in a knot so tight it looked. The night was thick and swollen with heat, even though the rains had come and gone. Inside the cracked-walled room, Yiana lay still. She hadn't spoken in days, hadn't laughed or cried. Her face had softened into something unreadable, as if she were neither child nor ghost, neither awake nor asleep. The pillow beneath her no longer stank. That was the strangest thing of all. After the basin had turned black and spat out her mother's hair, no one dared touch it again. Yet the smell, so foul and mocking before, had vanished. Now it gave off a faint scent of bitter leaves, like something being brewed. Like something unfinished. That night, as the compound held its breath, Yiana dreamed. But it wasn't a dream that belonged to her. In the vision the sky was missing. Only a swirling gray fog hung above. Beneath her was water, thick like broth, stretching in every direction. Islands of soft green moss floated here and there, and on each one was a bed. Not a mat, not a wooden cot, but full-sized beds like in the old houses long buried by time. Dozens. Then hundreds. Floating on the swamp like lilies. Girls lay upon them. Each bed held a girl and each girl writhed. Their mouths were open but no sound came out, only air, only the shape of screams. The pillows under their heads pulsed and moved like something alive, clinging to their skulls. Some girls kicked their legs helplessly. Others clawed at the fabric beneath them. The water stayed still. It didn't ripple with their struggle. The silence was immense, like a great cloth thrown over the world. Yiana tried to look away, but she couldn't. She was standing barefoot in the swamp. The water didn't reach her toes. She was dry, untouched. A witness. She turned her head. Her mother was there. Not as a ghost. Not as a memory. She was simply there, tall and bareheaded, her wrapper soaked to the thigh, her arms dark with mud. Her eyes were calm. Her mouth was moving. She was whispering something. Yiana stepped closer, her legs no longer her own. Her mother looked at her, fully, clearly. It was the first time Yiana had seen her like this since the day she disappeared into the hospital and never returned. No photos had captured her this clearly. No dream had ever dared conjure this much detail. The lines on her neck. The small scar on her jaw. The curve of her cheek that no one else in the family shared. Her lips moved again. Yiana leaned in. And this time she heard it. Yiana, her mother whispered, soft as wind. Yiana, listen. She tried. She truly did. But the girls on the beds began to move faster. Their silent screams grew desperate. The pillows writhed harder, gripping their heads, flattening, rising, flattening again. Like lungs. Like creatures. What are they? Yiana asked, or maybe only thought. Her mother pointed to the beds. They dream through filth. They breathe what others give them. But you let the filth speak. I don't understand. You will, her mother said, and placed one hand on her shoulder. The moment their skin touched, Yiana felt everything. The weight of grief sewn into cloth. The sour oil poured on old hair. The sting of shame buried under laughter. The dirt beneath fingernails that belonged to someone who was never allowed to rest. And under it all, the pulse of something still alive. She blinked and the swamp was gone. She was awake. But the house was not quiet. From the other room came a sound, not like before, not like giggling or whispers. It was sobbing. She sat up slowly. Her pillow did not shift beneath her. Stayed cool and still. But her cousins, the ones who had filled it with dung and sewn it shut with glee, were crying. Not one. All of them. Sobbing. She heard one gasp as if drowning. Another muttered, please, please, as if begging something unseen. Another whispered her name, not with malice but with fear. She stepped into the hallway barefoot. Her oldest cousin sat upright in her mat, tears sliding down both cheeks. Her eyes were wide open, staring into the dark as though someone stood in front of her. What did you see? Yiana asked softly. Her cousin whimpered. Beds, she said. Pillows. They moved. They breathed. And what else? But the girl shook her head violently and pressed her hands over her face. In the corner, another cousin coughed so hard he spat blood into his shirt. I heard her, he choked. Your mother. She said we should have left you alone. No one else could sleep that night. No one else dared. But Yiana walked slowly back to her mat and lay down, the pillow cool beneath her cheek. She didn't close her eyes. Because something was humming softly inside the stuffing. Not a song but a rhythm. Not a lullaby. A heartbeat. That night, Yiana lay down on the same mat she'd slept on since her mother died, the same mat no one touched, the same mat whose edges were now lined with feathers and ash. It had begun to dip in the middle, a slow sag that grew with each night. The others watched it but said nothing. The cousins now changed their paths to avoid her. Her aunt had stopped shouting. The whole compound moved with caution around her, as though her breath might trigger collapse. She curled her legs up beneath her, tucked her cheek onto her new pillow, the one she had sewn with scraps and secrets, and closed her eyes. The moon was fat that night, a white mouth hanging over the village, wide and waiting. At dawn, Ngozi's scream shattered the silence. The family rushed to the girl's hut, but they already knew something was wrong. A stench not of dung or smoke but of absence hung in the air. Her mat was gone. The floor where it had rested had sunk in, the red earth curling in on itself as if swallowing something precious and feared. Her belongings, the thread-wrapped pillow, the folded cloth at the corner, all gone. Not stolen. Just missing. The hollow pit where her bed had been was smooth. No torn earth. No hand marks. Just a perfect oval impression, like something had lain there too long and then disappeared into a world just beneath the soil. They dug. Her aunt, trembling, called for the neighbors. Together they clawed at the dirt, scooping with bare hands, with bowls, with broken calabashes. They unearthed nothing. Not cloth. Not wood. Not bone. Just deeper and deeper red soil, undisturbed. By mid-morning they wept. The aunt wailed, not for love but for fear, fear of a child devoured by whatever had answered the house's cruelty. Some whispered that the ground had taken revenge on their behalf. Others said she had finally merged with the thing inside the pillow. And some, more quietly, said she had gone to find her mother. They began preparing for burial, though there was no body. But just before noon, a goat herder ran from behind the house, panting. "She's on the roof," he cried. "The girl is sleeping on the roof." They laughed at him until they saw her. There she was, Yiana, curled like a cat atop the highest thatch. Her dress unwrinkled, hair unbothered, arms wrapped around her strange pillow. Her face looked younger, lips curved slightly in a peaceful smile. The air around her shimmered, not with heat, but with something else, like standing at the edge of a dream you're not allowed to enter. The ant called to her. Shouted. Beck. Yiana didn't stir. It was Ngozi, small and careful, who climbed the wooden frame inch by inch, reaching the edge of the roof. She peeked over. "She's breathing," she whispered. "She's humming." The humming was so soft it was almost imagined. But the wind heard it. And it carried that melody down, through the leaves, past the doorways into the ears of the gathered family. A lullaby. Not of this world. Not in any language they knew, but full of knowing. When she finally opened her eyes near dusk, Yiana looked straight into the sky. Not down at the ones who had mocked her, not toward the ant who now knelt with both hands pressed to her own chest, not even at Ngozi who still waited quietly beside her. She stood slowly, climbed down as though waking from a long beautiful sleep and said nothing. She walked through the middle of the compound. The dirt closed behind her feet. That night, no one dared sleep in her hut. In fact, no one dared sleep at all. They stayed awake and watched their beds like strangers, flinching at every creak, every sigh in the wood, every sudden shift in the straw. Because now they knew. Beds could remember. And dreams could rise from the ground. It began with a single fly. Fat, slow, and strange, it drifted through the compound's kitchen like it knew where it was going. The ant had just finished stirring the evening soup, a bitter mixture of yam peel and leftover pepper sauce. Her lips moved in a muttered prayer not meant for peace, just protection. Protection from what she couldn't name, though the fear had grown since the night they found Yiana on the roof. The fly hovered, then landed. Not on the food. Not on the walls. But directly on her lips. She froze. Its legs twitched, its wings fluttered once, then went still. And there, pressed against her mouth, the creature dropped dead. She spat it away, horrified. But when the dead fly hit the ground, its wings flared open, delicate and transparent, catching the firelight. Something shimmered on them. Lines. Not veins. Letters. The children gathered around her gasped. On the wings, barely visible, etched in something blacker than ink, was a name. Yiana. The ant screamed, stumbling backward, knocking over the cooking pot. Hot broth splashed across the ground, but no one noticed. They all stared at the dead fly, its wings still parted like pages in a cursed book. That night the air thickened. Flies came in waves. Not the usual scatter of hungry pests, but slow humming clusters that seemed to drift with intention. They didn't land on food. They landed on hands, on eyelids, on the walls above beds. The sound of them grew, low and rising, until it overtook the crickets, the frogs, even the wind through the trees. No one slept. Even the uncle who had once said, "It's just a girl," now swatted at invisible things, whispering that they were calling names in the dark. One cousin claimed he heard his own name in the buzzing. Another found a fly stuck in his ear. When they pulled it out, it was still alive and it bit him. They moved their sleeping mats to the main room, hoping the thick clay walls would shield them. But the flies followed. They didn't bite. They didn't feed. They simply gathered. Above doorframes. Inside shoes. In bowls of clean water that turned dark and warm. By morning the family was trembling. Eyes bloodshot. Mouths pressed shut in dread. But Yiana was nowhere to be seen. It was Ngozi who noticed the writing again. This time, scrawled in the soot along the base of the kitchen wall. Thin and spindly like something written with broken legs. "Do you smell her now?" The ant scrubbed at it, weeping. "Who is writing?" she yelled. "Who is doing this?" But no one answered. Not even the flies who now crawled over mirrors, their wings fanning in rhythm. By the third night, the family stopped sleeping in the house altogether. They dragged their mats outside, thinking the open air would offer relief. But the flies came even stronger out there, swirling above them like smoke from an invisible fire. One cousin covered himself completely with a wrapper, only for flies to crawl beneath the fabric and begin forming words on his chest in welts. When he screamed, the flies scattered. But the words remained faintly burned into his skin. Remember her. They all knew who her was. They all remembered the pillow. The dreams. The bed that vanished into the ground. The girl found sleeping on the roof like a crowned ghost. And now, these winged messengers who seemed to move with purpose, as though delivering judgment one insect at a time. The ant tried prayers next. She burned herbs, muttered chants, even poured palm wine into the soil. But the flies ignored her. The wine turned sour. The smoke clung to her clothes, heavy and choking. She even went to Yiana's old room, kneeling before the empty space where her bed had once been. "Please," she whispered. "Enough." The buzzing paused. Then one fly descended from the rafters. It circled her once, twice, 3 times, and landed on her tongue. She tried to spit it out, but her mouth locked. Her jaw froze. Her eyes rolled back. She fell to the floor, foaming. The family carried her out, but she never spoke again. Her lips stayed sealed for weeks, dry and cracked. And when finally she opened her mouth during the market day, a single dead fly dropped out. No one laughed. No one mocked Yiana again. From then on, the floor was where they slept, but not for comfort, not for penance. Only because the flies didn't follow them there. They clung to beds, to pillows, to silence. And through the quiet hum in the air, every member of that household began to hear something whispered in the rhythm of wings. "You named her filth. Now she names you, asterisk asterisk." The years crept forward, but some things didn't fade. In villages near and far, people whispered of a strange rot that visited certain homes. Not disease. Not decay from rain or rats. But something older, quieter, more purposeful. It always began with a pillow. Soft at first, perfectly ordinary. Then the seams would darken. The stuffing would shift strangely, like something breathing, slow and low just beneath the surface. The fabric would dampen, as though soaked in sweat from a sleeper who hadn't lain there. And soon flies would come. The parents would blame the children. The children would swear they hadn't done anything. But deep down some knew. They'd felt it. That faint pressure on the bed beside them. That sudden warmth across their chest. That quiet hum, almost like a lullaby, almost like someone else's dreams spilling over into theirs. It wasn't every home. Only the ones where the air held heavy silence. Where cruelty was passed around like a bowl of food. Where children flinched before speaking. Where laughter was something stolen or punished. In these homes, the pillows bloomed with rot like mushrooms in shadow. No one saw her arrive. But sometimes a girl's shape would be noticed, just for a blink, when the candle sputtered. A dent in the blanket. A breath in a room long closed. A giggle from beneath the floorboards. One woman swore she saw her reflected in the mirror at dawn, not standing, not waking, but curled up beneath the covers, in a bed no one had touched in weeks. She didn't scream. She simply left the house and never returned. People came to fear laughter with no source. A joke told cruelly that echoed back with a sound of glee no one claimed. Children began hesitating before mocking the quiet ones, the strange ones, the ones who still held on to their dreams. Because those were the children the girl chose to sleep beside. And sometimes, those children smiled in their sleep, even when their days were filled with silence and pain. They dreamed of warmth, of thick forests filled with strange beds, of pillows stitched with feathers and secrets. They woke with mud on their feet, with straw in their braids, with laughter in their throat that didn't feel like their own. And they stopped being afraid. Because Yiana, yes, some still remembered her name, hadn't vanished. She had spread. Into pillows and dreams. Into rooms that needed her most. Sometimes healers were called. Shrines lit. Beds burned. But the rot always returned, not just to the house that started it, but to others, like a story passed mouth to mouth. The story of a girl who had once been mocked, once been buried in stink and shame and silence. A girl who had drowned in dreams and risen out of filth, clean and smiling. Now she slept in all beds. Especially the ones where kindness had been starved. Especially the ones where someone wept into cloth at night, hoping not to wake. And where she slept, the air changed. Hard hearts softened. Goats calmed. Mothers paused before raising their voices. Fathers sat a little longer near the fire. Not always. Not enough. But sometimes something shifted. And still no one ever saw her clearly. Only the shape beneath the blanket. Only the dent in the straw. Only the laughter that followed after cruelty, soft, mocking, unbothered. And children whispered, passing it on like a chant, like a spell, like a warning wrapped in comfort. She's dreaming us now.